What is your name and what is today's date?
My name is Mark Henry Miller. Today's date is Thursday, February 13th, 2020.
All right. So, Mark Henry Miller, describe what you can remember about your first years of life, growing up, your parents, etc. Where'd you grow up and what was it like?
I was born on June 17th, 1940. I don't remember that, but I know that I was born. My mom and dad, Hank and S. Miller, purchased land and bought and built a home on the corner of 25th and Holman, Portland, Oregon. That home was ready to move in May. I was born the next month. My mom was a Schnell, and both sets of grandparents had migrated from Nootka, Russia along the Volga River to Portland. In my early days, there was only family and school, and that pretty much was what I experienced. I went to a grade school called Vernon for 8 years. The highlight that I carry even today, being 79, was my 8th grade class with Miss Agnes Carter. She taught English, corner second floor room at Vernon Grade School across from Alberta Park. That's all important to me, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But Miss Carter taught us how to speak well. And she taught us when we asked someone, "How are you doing?" they would answer, "Good." We'd always say, "I hope you're doing it well." Our class memorized all the prepositions, all the being verbs, and all the linking verbs in the English language. I could say every one of them right now, but I won't. When our class got to Jefferson High School, there were 3 different English classes at Jeff for freshmen. Every teacher could immediately identify Miss Carter's students because we always got A's. My sister Marilyn was born on February 2nd, 1942, so she was 2 years younger than I. What I remember in high school is that I remember sports. I was very competitive. I played baseball and I played basketball. I wasn't fast enough or big enough to play football. I pitched only because my father encouraged that. I was born right-handed, but when I was 8 years old, my father gave me my first baseball glove and put it on my right hand. And I said, "Dad, I'm right-handed." He only responded, "Mark, left-handed pitchers make more money." So I then became a left-handed pitcher, and there was a junior varsity team and a varsity team. I pitched my first game on the junior varsity for Jefferson High School against Cleveland High School, and I threw a no-hitter. Whoa! I didn't even realize that I didn't give up hits till after the game, and the scorekeeper showed me the score sheet. I should have kept it, I didn't. But then, one Sunday night, my freshman year in the spring, when I came home after youth meeting at church, my dad handed me a note and said, "See Mr. Richards the next morning." Harry Richards was the varsity baseball coach. I saw him in the morning and he said, "Mark, we want you to now suit up for the varsity." It ended up I was the first freshman to play varsity baseball at Jefferson High School in 40 years. The game that I went to was at Alberta Park that was right across from Vernon Grade School. I sat on the bench. Halfway through the game, Coach Richards said, "Miller, warm up." I can remember how nervous I was. There was no bullpen to warm up. I had no idea how far home plate was. Nobody, from a pitcher's mound. Nobody told me it was 60 feet 6 inches. So I went and started throwing to warm up. Coach Richards called timeout, went out to the mound, and called the umpire out, and the umpire waved me in. Well, I just stood there and waved back. And then he yelled, "Come on in here, kid." So I went in to pitch. My first game against Franklin High School, my first 3 warm-up pitchers went way over the catcher's head. Just before I threw the first official pitch, I looked behind the first base screen, and there stood my father in his garbage man clothes, because he was a garbage man, and I looked and saw his garbage truck parked by the curb of the park. My dad never missed a game I played, nor did my mother in all 4 years of high school. And then I looked over to the left field. The fence was actually a sidewalk, and there sat in the car my grandma and grandpa Miller in a 1939 Oldsmobile. About the 3rd inning, a player for Franklin hit a home run, and it went over my grandma and grandpa's car, and I looked, and my grandma was clapping. After the game, I said, "Grandma, he hit a home run." And her only answer was, "Honey, you made him look so good."
Oh my gosh.
They were great. So that baseball was an important part of my life. So was church. We were members of Zion Congregational Church. It was a German background church. Every member of the church had a German name. So if you weren't Spady or Schlitt or Dinas or Schnell or Miller, you probably couldn't get in. Church became very important to me. And when I was a junior, I was the president of the Fellowship of Oregon of the Congregational Church. Jeanette Butts, one of my classmates, was also a member of that cabinet. One weekend, she and I drove to Ione, Oregon, Central Oregon, to work with a youth group. We came back Sunday night. I drove, parked in front of Jeanette's house, and out of the blue, I looked at her and said, "Jeanette, I have a question." She listened. I said, "I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. For some reason, at 16, I thought you should know that." I'll never forget it. Jeanette just laughed. And she said, "That's the dumbest question you could ever ask. You know, of course, you're going to be a minister." That stuck with me. I went home that night, woke up my mom and dad, told them I decided that I was going to be a Christian minister. My mom started to tear up and said, "Honey, that's great." Dad, which was so characteristic, cleared his throat and he said, "Mark, get a good night's sleep. We'll talk about it in the morning." I then had to decide where to go to college. I can honestly say in October of 1957, my senior year, I had not made any decision. I hadn't really thought about it. it just never was anything we talked about in high school. Don Duncan, who was one of my classmates, one afternoon in October of 57, I said, "What are you going to do after school?" And he said, "I'm going to a conference. There's a speaker from Stanford." And I honestly said, "Where is that?" And he said, "It's in California, south of San Francisco." I heard this guy speak and I thought, wow, that's a great school. So I went ahead and applied to Stanford, although I thought I'd end up at the University of Oregon or Willamette University, which was in Salem. Then in February of 1958, I got a phone call. The man calling, and this was landline, so it wasn't any video thing on the phone. Anyway, he introduced himself and he said, "Mark, my name is Dr. Jerome Holtzman. My son Mickey is the freshman baseball coach at Stanford, and he wanted me to call you to say you've been accepted to Stanford. He hopes that you'll come to Stanford, and he's giving you a baseball scholarship." I thought, whoa. Then my senior year in high school, I pitched, but I also was a pretty good hitter, mainly because my father knew that you never swing up, you always swing at a down angle. And my senior year, I actually hit very well, and I ended up being the batting champion of the Portland High School League. And I remember I was 21 for 49, which comes out to 429 batting average. Baseball continued when I got to Stanford because I had the scholarship. In those days, there was a freshman team and a varsity team. What I do remember is that there were 13 guys that went out for the freshman baseball team. 9 of us had been high school pitchers. Well, I mentioned earlier, I'm very competitive. So I said within myself, I want to be a starter. The first time I pitched was a scrimmage against the varsity. I remember clearly I pitched 3 innings and they only got 1 hit off me. The next Monday, Coach Dutch Faring, a really nice man, he was nicer than he was good as far as a baseball technician. At any rate, he said to me, "Oh, I wish you could play varsity." Well, I didn't play varsity because they couldn't promote me. But I also remember my first time at bat as a freshman. We were playing a team from San Francisco at Stanford, and the first time I got up, the bases were loaded, and bam, I hit a triple. It should have been an inside the park home run, but I wasn't fast enough. But I thought that was a good start. But in those days, we didn't have a designated hitter. So that is what I ended up doing. I pitched. I did pitch for 4 years, and when I finished at Stanford, I was offered a contract by agents from the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Pittsburgh Pirates. But I was intent on going to ministry, so I decided not to sign a contract. Besides, the truth is, I wasn't that good. But we did have a pitcher on our staff who was better than good. His name is Jim Lonborg, Lonborg. He ended up pitching for Boston, and he ended up winning 3 games in a World Series for Boston. So I could say I was on the staff with Jim Lonborg. In the mix of all that, and I haven't mentioned it because I was thinking mainly of school, but I learned to fish. And that was because my father loved to fish, and he would take me with him on many fishing trips. I do want to say one story that is vivid. We didn't own a boat, but when we went to a river, we rented a boat. One of the feature times to fish in Portland is in the spring, when the spring Chinook run. They come in from the ocean, up the Columbia River, and then up the Willamette River. My dad, I was probably 7 or 8, so that would have been 1947 or 48. We went to Scappoose, Oregon, rented a boat from White Moorage, and in those days, you were in an anchor line. So we rented an anchor and a rope, and we went out and got in an anchor line, and there were nothing but garbage men there. They were all buddies, and my dad was a garbage man, so that was the deal. We let out spinners, put the poles in the rod holder, and it wasn't very long, I don't know, maybe a half an hour, and all of a sudden my rod bent almost in half. The reel was singing as the line was going out, and we started to bring the fish in. Well, this was let's say 1947. There were no nets. There were only gaff hooks. So Dad had a gaff hook. I brought the salmon up. We stayed in the anchor line. He gaff hooked the fish in the side of the head, lifted it up, but didn't lift it high enough. It hit the boat and went back in the river, but it was still on. I brought it back. He tried it a second time, hit the side of the boat and snapped the line, and the fish was lost. I don't think we could have felt worse. Anything was better than losing a fish. One of the friends of my father in that line said, "You guys go down. That fish isn't going to sink, it's going to surface." And just as he said that, I looked, a boat was coming upstream, a young couple. The man pointed, drove over, or floated over in his boat, and then he reached down and he lifted my salmon into his boat. One of the men in our anchor line went over and cut them off, and I couldn't hear what they were saying, but they were obviously saying, "Look at this young boy, that should be his fish." And all they did was shake their heads. I remember the name of the boat was the Old Snaggy. The next year, Dad and I were fishing there, and we were trolling, and I saw that boat, the Old Snaggy, and I thought, I didn't know how to spell revenge, but I'm sure I wanted to get back at them for stealing, grabbing my fish. But then I backed off, and I thought, no, that could be trouble. So fishing started, and pretty much my whole life has been fishing for a highlight. I take my sons, Matthew and Andrew. We love to fish. I could name any kind of fishing experiences, but I want to talk for a minute about what was really important. And that was when I graduated from Yale, I was ordained into the ministry. It was on June 17th, 1966, my 26th birthday. I was ordained at Zion Congregational Church, my home church. I then went to my first ministry, which was in Chicago. The reason I went to Chicago is that my first wife, Nancy, was an underclass student at the University of Chicago. So I got the job in Chicago. She went to school. She got an undergraduate degree and a master's degree. That was terrific. The best part of ministry was my first 3.5 years at St. Paul's Church at Fullerton and Orchard in the north side of Chicago. Fred Trost was the senior minister, and even today, February 13th, 2020, he remains my closest friend. I learned so much from him about ministry. I learned a little about preaching. I learned a little about teaching. But the main dynamic I learned about ministry is also about life. You have to have heart, and you have to care for people. And I try to help not only church members, but fellow clergy Learn how to spell wine without an H. Don't leave away, don't keep out understanding. It's too easy to judge. It should be a priority to understand and help people where and how they are.